Why does Putin seem so illogical when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine? To us in the West, those of us that support NATO and those of us that are supporting Ukraine defending itself, regardless of how difficult of a challenge that may be. I just heard on the news this week another analyst describing how crazy it would be if President Putin decided to invade a NATO country, and that it would be just silly if he fired rounds into Poland, or if he fired rounds into somewhere else, right? Or if he conducted an insurgent like attack in France or something. But it may seem illogical from our perspective, but that's not taking into account what he's thinking. And maybe that seems obvious, but I just hear far too often analysts making statements, making assessments on situations from their perspective and through their lens, and not thinking critically, taking the time to think about how they're actually thinking, and which is such a critical skill in intelligence analysis or historiography, or any of those other disciplines where you just don't have a black and white answer. You really have to think and look through somebody else's perspective. I mean, this was made famous in the 20th century, this concept of the Western lens, by Edward Said, the late Edward Said, when he wrote his book in the 70s, Orientalism, when it came to the West's perspective on the Middle East. Well, the same is the case today when it comes to Eastern Europe or Asia when we're dealing with Russia. Just because something may seem silly to us doesn't mean it's silly to Mr. Putin. In fact, to go even further, by saying it would be illogical to invade a NATO country makes the assumption that the only thing that matters is victory in the conflict. Well, what if there are a whole litany of other priorities that Mr. Putin has, and maybe our definition of what is victorious and what isn't what his is? And so then therefore it wouldn't be illogical. I mean, give you just a simple analogy, right? What if you had a freshman in high school who was going to have a big fight with a senior, somebody much older and much bigger, and you're looking at it from the outside saying, boy, that would be really silly if this freshman got into a fight with this big senior. There's no way he could win. Well, that's making the assumption that he even wanted to win. I mean, what if he has other priorities? What if he's getting into this fight because he wanted to demonstrate how brave he is? And so how brave he was in this altercation. And so it doesn't even matter if he wins. But if you're standing on the sideline thinking, well, they're going to fight in the hallway and the only thing that matters is victory, then that seems illogical. But you don't know what that other person is thinking. So maybe that person's best friend knows because they've studied and they've looked through that person's perspective, and they say, well, it's not really about winning. The same can be true for Russia, and likely is. Now, potentially, yes, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine thinking he would be victorious militarily, right? He crossed the border. He was heading towards Kyiv. He made it just to the outskirts. Some say even just a few hundred meters outside of Kyiv. And then he got pushed back. And now he's struggling with a stalemate because of the support that Ukraine is getting from NATO countries and the United States and other things. So from that singular thought category, then yeah, he may have lost. And so then going further and attacking a NATO country would be silly. Well, what if he's taken the last 2 years and shifted perspectives? What if it isn't just about winning? What if it's about proving to the rest of his allies in the East that he's capable of A, B, and C, and only really wants to retain control of Kyiv? What if he's just there to waste as much ammunition and spend as much money as he can, or force NATO to spend as much money as he would like? Those are the priorities. We don't really know. Now, it's a challenge to look through someone else's lens because it's not our lens, and so therefore we're not comfortable with it. But that's the part about critical thinking. We have to force ourselves to use somebody else's lens to get closer to the answer than we are already. It doesn't mean we'll get the answer. It doesn't mean we'll figure out what Vladimir Putin is doing. It doesn't mean that we'll be able to predict. Clearly, we couldn't even predict well enough to know that he was going to invade in February of 2022. But we can get closer And what we don't need to be doing as analysts is just simply spouting off, making an assessment and saying, boy, that sounds like a silly idea, when we're not thinking critically about the other person's perspective.